everyone. We're going to get started with introductions just a few minutes before noon so we can get started with the content right on time. My name is Carla Belzer, and I'm a family life educator with the University of Illinois Extension. I would like to welcome you all to the Summer Self-Care Series. This series is a collaboration between Illinois Extension and the Interdisciplinary Health Sciences Institute at the University of Illinois. And it really is designed to connect those across the state with researchers at the university and provide those evidence-based educational programming. So if you have any questions during our program today, please be sure to type those in the chat box and we will address those as we can. And there will be times throughout the presentation and at the end when we will have time for questions and answers. So if you are joining us today by phone, be sure to hold your questions until the end of the session. It also is important to note that the session is being recorded. So you will be able to access the recording at a later date. Your microphones have been muted and your videos have been stopped. So you personally will not be recorded in any way. But we just wanted to make you aware of that. So I'm going to toss it back to Chelsea for a few housekeeping items. Chelsea, you there?
Thanks, Carla. My name's Chelsea Byers, and I too am a family life educator with U of I Extension. And I'm going to launch a quick poll. So if you will fill out our quick poll, you can fill that out. I would appreciate it. So you can go ahead and start that poll. You should see it now. Also, while you're filling out that poll, I am going to bring your attention to the chat box. If you are seeking CEUs and you have paid for them, or if you are a teacher and want CPDUs and chose to get those, you can go to our Google Doc and sign in there. If you have any trouble with that, you can seek me out. Unfortunately, today, I am not under my name, Chelsea Byers. You can look for UIE-FCS, so I apologize. I signed in under our team account. So let me know and I can help you sign in. And we also sent out in your reminder email a poll that we are going to be doing. And so if you have already done the first poll that will be discussed today. There was a link in your email, but if you have not done that, I will also throw a link into the chat box on what words come to mind when you think of menopause. So there is a link in the chat box that you can click on, but we will be accessing in just a moment. So take it away, Carla.
Perfect. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker for this series today, Dr. Katherine Hatcher. Katherine has received her Bachelor's of Science in Biological Sciences in 2012 from the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, and she also completed her Master of Science in Neurobiology in 2015 from Northwestern University. Katherine recently completed her Ph.D. in neuroscience from the University of Illinois earlier this month. For her PhD, she studied how hormones and endocrine disrupting chemicals influence sleep in menopausal women. So she's going to be starting a postdoc research position next week, studying the role of the brain in regulating reproduction. Today, she's going to be talking to us about menopause symptoms, what causes them, and what lifestyle changes we can make to improve wellness during midlife. So Katherine, if you're ready.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
All right, thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for creating this program, everybody who is involved in starting it. I'm really excited to be here and really excited to chat with you about some things that I find very important and that are often not addressed when thinking about menopause and how to improve life for women going through menopause. Before I get started, I do want to acknowledge that I am now in the Hudson Valley, so I'm actually in the East Coast. Therefore, I am presenting to you from the occupied land of the Mohican people. And if you're interested in learning more about occupied land and why people might acknowledge this sort of issue, I have put a link here in the presentation. I've also listed my email here. If you have a question following this, of course, you can reach out to the organizers or you can reach out to me directly. I've also included my social media accounts, so you may connect with me there as well. Before I get started, it sounds like somebody still has their mic on, just heads up. But before I get started, I do want to just leave this quick disclaimer. So first of all, I am a doctor, but I am not that kind of doctor, meaning I am not a medical doctor. Therefore, I am talking to you more so from the research side of things instead of the medical side of things. So any sort of kind of medical information I provide to you is solely based from a research standpoint as opposed to like a medical advice standpoint. And even if I were that kind of doctor, I am not your doctor. Therefore, I don't know your history. I don't know your, like, what medications you're taking or anything like that. So I cannot provide direct medical advice to you. And so if you are interested in talking more about these things, more so from an individual standpoint or a medical standpoint, please consult your doctor or your medical health professionals before starting any sort of new therapy or exercise or anything like that. So that's just a quick disclaimer. I wanted to start off the conversation with those things. So just to give a brief overview of what we'll be talking about today, first of all, I'm going to talk to you about some menopause basics. So giving you some general background before we dive into the kind of lifestyle changes that we can make in order to improve our quality of life. I'm also going to talk to you about the symptoms of menopause. So what in general can women expect as they go through the menopause transition? I'm also going to just give a brief overview of some factors that are known to influence symptoms during menopause. Then we're going to do a brief check-in, and then we'll talk about what we can do for our wellness during midlife. And then we'll have some conclusions and a question and answer session toward the end. So while we do encourage you to put questions in the chat as I go along, I won't be addressing those questions until either the center of the conversation or toward the end of the conversation. And although there was a lovely introduction, I do want to just give some general background for those who might be jumping in a little later or who might have missed who I am. I wanted to just introduce myself. So although you can't see me, this was me a couple weeks ago, right after I finished my PhD. This was me actually getting ready to present to my friends and family on campus. So I did my Bachelor of Science in Biological Sciences, as mentioned. I actually taught high school for a couple of years before going back to do my graduate degrees. I then got my Master of Science in Neurobiology from Northwestern. And then, like was said, I just completed my PhD in neuroscience about, I think 3 weeks ago now. It was June 5th. So it feels like it's been months, but it's only been a couple of weeks. I'm actually starting what's known as a postdoc in neuroendocrinology. So I'm just going to be doing more research and getting additional training. I'm actually here at Albany Medical College in Albany, New York. So just a general overview of some of the research topics I've addressed over my years of being a researcher. I've studied things like menopause, sleep, circadian rhythms, toxicology, endocrine disrupting chemicals, hormones or endocrinology, reproductive physiology, and sex differences. So thinking about how men and women or males and female animals might be different. I also host a podcast called Endocrine Disruptors Podcast. You can find it here at this link. And this podcast addresses hormones and endocrine disrupting chemicals, trying to make kind of a bridge between the public and the scientists who study those topics. Although it's on hiatus right now, I'm going to be launching a few new episodes coming up soon. And then finally, just a little personal information about me to kind of show that I am a normal human as well as a scientist. I am a cat mom to 3 cats. I love to cook and bake. Here are some cupcakes I made earlier this year for my partner's birthday. I love to collect, I should put in quotations, collect craft beer. Really, I just like to drink craft beer. This is actually a picture from Triptych. If you're from Central Illinois, you should know Triptych in Savoy. And I'm an amateur embroiderer. I like to do stitching and other types of crafts like that. And I love to read fiction. So if you have any book recommendations, I would love to hear them. So I'm going to actually pause here. I know some of you have started to fill out the Mentimeter poll that I believe Chelsea sent out regarding what words come to mind when you think of menopause. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen just so we can jump over to this. Let me do that. And you're going to have the opportunity to continue to answer this question if you'd like. So you can go to this www.menti.com and use the code 688955 if you'd like to add what words come to mind when you think of menopause. And it looks like the link to this was added just to the chat, so you can click on that link as well. And I just want to take about a minute to do this. And you can continue to add to this poll and we can kind of share this out toward the end. And I really think this is important for us to see that a lot of these concerns, if you're not familiar with word clouds, actually the larger words are those that more people are sharing. So hot flashes, a lot of people are going to be thinking of hot flashes and aging and change and hormones. Those are very common words that folks are going to think about when they think of menopause. And I like this system because that helps us see that a lot of the concerns that we have, or a lot of thoughts that we have around menopause, are very consistent across different people. Like how I view menopause is going to be relatively similar to, the next person that I try to talk to about it. So you can keep adding. And a lot of these things we're going to address today, not all of them, but some of them, especially hot flashes, maybe mood swings, depression, anxiety. We're going to talk about hormones today. We're definitely going to talk about sleep. I'm a little biased though. And of course, the building. All right. So keep adding to that. I'm going to share my screen. And we're going to continue our conversation, but you can continue to add words to that poll. It's really just for us to see kind of the continuation or the similar feelings that we're all feeling around menopause. And I hope that some of that starts to improve, or our outlook of menopause starts to improve after today's conversation. So first, I'm going to talk to you about some menopause basics. That's going to be the first part of today's conversation. So what is menopause? What does it look like? What causes it? What are the symptoms that may arise during menopause? And what makes those symptoms worse? Those are going to be the main things that we talk about. And somebody has their audio on. Okay. All right. So before I talk about menopause in general, I want to talk to you a little bit about some basics regarding reproductive physiology. A lot of folks may know about this already, but I think it really helps frame the general understanding of why we go through menopause. So before I talk to you about the causes of menopause, I want to give you some background. So when we think about the main organs or the main players involved in regulating hormones, there are three main contributors. First is this part of the brain that sits right kind of smack dab in the middle, called the hypothalamus. There are some very specialized structures within the hypothalamus that are involved in regulating hormone release. Then is this gland called the pituitary. So if you're wondering where that is located, one of my favorite kind of ways to get people to think about where this might be, if you take your finger, and I'm not going to do it because I won't be able to talk, but you put it in the kind of the back of your mouth and push up toward the roof of your mouth, that is around, if you keep going like up into your brain, that's where your pituitary would be. So it actually sits above the roof of your mouth, just dangling from the brain. And it's actually connected to the hypothalamus. So you can see if the hypothalamus is this kind of dark portion and a little bit of the white portion, the pituitary hangs right off of that. And then also the ovaries are involved in regulating hormones. And I think this is what most people think about when they think about reproductive hormones, that and the uterus and things like that. But the brain and the pituitary are also involved. And so why do we care about this? Well, the menstrual cycle is regulated by hormones from the ovaries. So menstruation and the cycle that we go through is regulated by hormones released from the ovaries, but the ovaries require signals from the brain and the pituitary in order to stimulate the production of those hormones. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in the next couple of slides. And it's actually the dysfunction of all of these organs that occurs during aging or following different medical procedures. And those are known to be the main drivers of menopause. And I'm going to specifically talk about the role that the ovary plays in the development of menopause. So let's talk a little bit more about the ovary in general. So I like to think of the ovary as this kind of bundle of grapes. It has a bunch of little sections or little grapes that are known as ovarian follicles. And those ovarian follicles, so in each of these grapes would be where an egg is located. And that egg, you know, is what we think of when we think of ovulation and fertility. So those ovarian follicles are kind of little nests where the egg is going to grow and mature. And those ovarian follicles not only help the egg mature, but they also are very important for producing hormones. So you have immature eggs or immature follicles that are going to develop and become more mature follicles across the entire monthly cycle. So this is happening every month in our ovaries. You have, sorry about that. You have immature follicles that continue to grow across that 28-day month or 28-day cycle, and then become these mature follicles that are going to produce hormones called estrogens and progesterone. Most people refer to estrogen as like one of the main reproductive hormones, but estrogens are actually a class of hormones. There's multiple estrogens that circulate in your body. So you might hear me say estrogens, and that's generally what I'm referring to. Estradiol is the most common one that people know of, but that's kind of getting into semantics. So I'll just say estrogens from here on out. But those are the mature follicles. Before they ovulate, they're producing estrogens and progesterone. Then you go through ovulation. And then before your period, after ovulation, you have this more mature follicle called a corpus luteum. And anybody who has had to go through fertility treatments or anything like that, you're probably familiar with CLs or corpora lutea. These mature, kind of halfway between mature follicle and dead follicle, are pregnancy supporting follicles. And these tell us, hey, there was a successful ovulation. And if you were to get pregnant, it's going to help support pregnancy because it's producing progesterone. And so these hormones, these estrogens and progesterones, are cycling throughout the 28th-day month, or what we refer to as the menstrual cycle. A lot of us think of the period or our menses or our menstruation as the most important part. And while that's what we see, you know, physically every month, there are a lot of other things going on in the background, like fluctuation of hormones and growth of those follicles. So I'm going to just briefly go over this. And this cycle of hormones is really important when we start to look at the overall changes in hormones that occur during menopause. So the first week or so of a person's cycle, they're going to experience menstruation. And this is after pregnancy did not occur. There will be release of ovarian tissue, and then women will experience these periods. And during this time, hormones are relatively low. So you have hormones coming from the pituitary, like follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, and then hormones coming from the ovaries, estrogens and progesterone. So during the period or during menstruation, these hormones are relatively low to one another. Then as you progress through the cycle, so we're looking at days here on this portion of the chart, At about 1 week into the cycle, those ovarian follicles start to grow again. So the picture that I was showing here, this process starts to happen again, where it takes an immature follicle and grows into a mature one. During that time, you start to have a rise in estrogens. So estrogens start to get higher and higher during the second week of your cycle. And right before ovulation, estradiol or estrogens reach a peak. And after that peak, they stimulate this peak of luteinizing hormone. This hormone is critical to cause ovulation. So luteinizing hormone tells the mature follicle, hey, release that egg. Then the egg is released and ovulation occurs. You also have a little bump in this follicle stimulating hormone that's also involved in the process of ovulation. Then estradiol declines significantly. It rises a little bit again toward the third week of your cycle and then begins to decline by the end of your cycle. Right after ovulation, because this corpus luteum develops, you actually have a rise in progesterone. And so this rise in progesterone is going to coincide with the secretory phase, which just means that secretion of hormones to support pregnancy and other factors is occurring. So progesterone peaks and then falls again. And then if pregnancy does not occur at the end of this cycle, then menstruation or your period happens again. And then all over again, the cycle begins. And so in normally cycling women, this happens approximately every 28 days. Your cycle might be slightly longer, slightly shorter. I bring all these hormones up and I talk about them because they're important, especially estrogens and follicle stimulating hormone are important when we think about women's hormone profiles during menopause.
Katherine?
Yes.
Can we answer a quick question from the chat box?
Absolutely.
So the question was, if a woman has a period duration of 23 to 25 days instead of 28, would you suggest that she is low on progesterone or another hormone?
So her levels might not necessarily be low, but the period of time at which they are peaking might be shorter, and that could potentially influence other things. But I wouldn't say that her hormones might necessarily be lower or not. It's hard to say if this, your cycle length is determined by your hormone profiles or vice versa. It's kind of hard to disassociate those two things from one another, but that's a great question.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So I bring all of those hormones up, and I'm going to actually talk about them a little bit more in context of menopause now in this slide. I'm going to talk about these first things really quick. So in general, when we talk about menopause, there's kind of two sides to this term. For folks talking about the science, we're generally referring to menopause as your last menstrual period. So the last time you have a menstrual period, that is your menopause, or that is when you have gone into menopause. But to everybody else, and I think to the purpose of our conversation today, menopause is generally referring to the period of time before and after your final menstrual period. So you might see folks in the literature referring to this as the menopause transition, postmenopause, perimenopause. There's a lot of different terms that you might see folks referring to, but they're generally referring to that period of time around the final menstrual period, or what menopause is kind of coinciding with. And so I brought up those hormones previously because they're very critical in context of thinking about how hormones change as we age. And I'm going to actually break this figure down a little bit more for you. So here going up, I have high hormone levels. So if it's up higher, that means it's a higher amount of hormone. If it's lower, it's a lower amount of hormone. And then down here across the bottom, I have age. So I have three sections split into reproductive age, menopause transition, or perimenopause, and then postmenopause. And I'm going to talk about these three panels as we go through. So hormones, especially estrogens and follicle stimulating hormone, exhibit specific patterns, as I was showing in the previous slide. In reproductive age, after people undergo their first menstrual period around the age of 13, estrogens are now going to be relatively high compared to pituitary hormones like follicle stimulating hormone. And these two hormones are generally used to determine what stage of reproductive aging a person is in. So during normal reproductive age, estrogens are going to be relatively high, follicle stimulating hormone is relatively low. And then around mid 30s to 40s, people will start to go through the menopause transition, or what's also referred to as perimenopause. During this time, women will experience irregular periods because their cycles might not occur as frequently, might be longer at all. During this time, estrogen levels are going to start to decrease. And then follicle stimulating hormone is going to start to, point isn't quite known when this happens, but the relative amount of hormones to one another is going to flip. It's actually going to become higher, and estrogen is going to become lower. And as this continues, these hormones might still be fluctuating, but the relative amount of one another is going to have flipped. Then women undergo their final period or their final menstrual cycle. That occurs on average around the age of 51, but it's going to vary a lot depending on a lot of different factors. At this point, folks will have gone into postmenopause. Yes.
Katherine, if you want to say what you just said again, you broke up pretty bad just a moment ago.
Where should I start off?
Yeah, average age being 51. Thank you, Kate. I'm like,
Yeah, that's fine. So women's final menstrual periods will occur around the age of 51. I turned off my Wi-Fi off my phone, so that should help a little bit. So around the age of 51, women go through their final menstrual period, and at that point, they've entered into postmenopause. Follicle stimulation, that remains consistent, and this is going to continue throughout the remainder of life. And so this switch in hormone profiles is a lot of what people think of as being the main driver of a lot of the symptoms and negative health outcomes that occur either during perimenopause or even into postmenopause and into even older ages. And so this is why I wanted to bring this kind of flip-flop up, because I think that's critical to address. And I think it would also be remiss to not mention that there are potentially different ways that women can go through menopause. So it's not just because of aging, there can actually be other reasons. So yes, natural menopause is going to be what we think of when we generally think of menopause for most folks. So this is due to the natural decline. And I put in quotations natural because all of these other things are natural too. If you go through either surgical or medical menopause or early onset, it doesn't mean you're unnatural. It just means that it's different from what the original definition was. So natural menopause refers to the natural decline due to aging of the hypothalamus, pituitary, and ovaries. This can actually occur over the span of several years. For some folks, it might only take 4 years, and for others, it could take up to 10 years. And the main driver of this is loss of those ovarian follicles, or those little grapes within the ovary. Women are born with a finite number, meaning if I am born with 1 million, I only have 1 million follicles, and that will begin to decline as soon as I am born. And so that amount can never increase, it only ever decreases. So because as I go through my life, those follicles die off due to natural aging and ovarian cycles, that leads to loss of follicles to the point where when I'm in my midlife, I'll have lower amounts of estrogens and progesterone in general. Then early onset menopause is the same thing. It's the same natural occurring menopause for the most part, except it often happens earlier than what most people would expect it to. And that's why we call it early onset. It can be during where your final menstrual period occurs around the age of 40 as opposed to 50. Although it can happen because of early or premature aging of the ovary, it can also happen due to secondary, or it can happen because of other medical conditions like diabetes or hypothyroidism or other medical conditions that could potentially cause your ovaries to stop functioning properly at an earlier age. Genetics can also contribute to this. I'm not as familiar with the genetic component, but it appears that as some women, they go through earlier onset menopause, their daughters or their family members might be more likely to as well. And then also lifestyle factors. One of the most well-studied factors that influences early onset menopause is smoking. And then finally, surgical and medical menopause is another type of menopause. And this is often a consequence of something like an ovaryectomy or removal of the ovaries, or full hysterectomy, or it can be in response to chemotherapy as well. And this results in a sudden drop in hormone levels and onset of menopause symptoms. As opposed to happening over the span of years, it happens pretty much overnight. And so menopause and surgical and medical menopause looks very different often than natural or early onset menopause. But what does menopause look like? Regardless of why you go through menopause, it will generally look like the general symptoms are going to look the same regardless of type. Now, the symptoms that you experience might be different than the symptoms that your mother or your friends experience, but we can at least expect kind of some of these symptoms to be happening in combination or individually in a person. So always, folks are going to have irregular periods or cessation of periods, or your periods stop. Women can also experience other symptoms like sleep disruptions, mood changes, thinning of hair or skin, hot flashes or chills or night sweats, metabolism changes, either increased risk of things like diabetes or increased weight or other things like that, changes in the way that your body fat is distributed, and then vaginal dryness and changes in sex drive. And all of these symptoms are very critical to influence a woman's quality of life. I linked here an article that talks about 34 potential signs of menopause. I think that things like hot flashes and vaginal dryness or reduced sex drive are talked about a lot, but there are a lot of different types of symptoms that people can experience. And like I said, not everybody looks the same when it comes to menopause symptoms. And so I'm going to have two slides here that just give a very brief overview of some of the factors that are known to influence menopause symptoms. First is menstrual history, and this means that how early you start your period as an adolescent may influence when you go through menopause. So the earlier you go through or you start your period, it could potentially mean that you will go through menopause earlier. Not always, but sometimes. Your overall health, so things like fat mass, or your whether or not you have diabetes or hyperthyroidism or hypothyroidism, other factors like that can influence menopause symptoms. Pregnancies, so how many pregnancies you have, the earliest you have your first, or when you have your first pregnancy, those types of factors can influence menopause symptoms. When you start to go through menopause, like I said, women may go through earlier onset menopause, and this can actually be detrimental later in life because you've lived longer with lower amounts of estrogens. And so it can lead to earlier risk of osteoporosis or metabolism changes or things like that. Chemical exposure has been shown to influence the age in which you go through menopause. And then I also wanted to bring up ethnicity and culture. And this isn't like your ethnicity is going to influence your menopause, but your ethnicity and your culture and your mindset around menopause can actually influence your kind of approach, your mentality around menopause. It seems like some groups or some cultures may be more accepting of reproductive aging, whereas others are not. And so the more accepting your culture is regarding menopause, it can actually influence your quality of life. Some other factors, smoking history, I'll talk a little bit more about this later. Alcohol use, excessive alcohol use can make menopause symptoms worse. Physical activity, we'll actually talk about more about this later. Socioeconomic factors, especially in regards to your access to medical care, your access to community resources that might kind of improve your mindset regarding menopause. Either higher or lower amounts of fat mass may influence how severe your symptoms are. And then even diet and nutrition. And I wanted to talk about this if I could later on in the lifestyle factors that we can change. I didn't find a lot of information about this, except to say that it seems that diets lower in inflammatory compounds are better for quality of life in menopause. And so that might be something I can try to find a little bit more information on later and get that available to folks. So just to give a quick overview of what we just talked about, what matters most from kind of summarizing the last 20 minutes or so of our conversation. So first, changes in function of the hypothalamus, pituitary, and ovaries are during aging or because of medical conditions or surgeries. That is what causes menopause. That is why we go through menopause. When we go through menopause, there are changes in our hormone profiles, primarily estrogens and follicle stimulating hormone, but levels of progesterone also decline. And I didn't talk about this too much, but it is known to decline during menopause as well. Regardless of why you go through menopause, you will likely experience some sort of symptom, but what those symptoms look like are going to vary a lot based off of your biology and your environment. And then regardless of the reason, if something is bothering you, if a symptom is bothering you, or if something is concerning to you, talk to your doctor. I didn't reiterate that, but I want to bring that up, and I'll bring that up several times as we talk today. So before I move on, I wanted to just take a second and see if there are any questions that are relevant to what we just talked about before I talk about what we have control over, what we can actually do to improve our quality of life. So I didn't know
Catherine, yeah, we have quite a few questions that have come up in the chat box. So there was a question regarding what the research is behind thyroid disease concerning hormone profiles. I don't know if you want to touch on that.
Yeah, so I'm not very familiar with it, but I do know that the way that your thyroid functions also depends on your hypothalamus. And so if you're having, and the thyroid hormones feed back onto your hypothalamus as well. So it's kind of this loop of control and communication. And so if your thyroid is disrupted, it may also lead to, changes in the hypothalamus that aren't necessarily good for your reproductive system. Another thing too could be there are a lot of metabolism changes that occur during thyroid disease. And your metabolism functioning normally, I put normally in quotations, but your metabolism functioning as normal as it can is very important for reproduction. And so anything that disrupts metabolism could disrupt reproductive systems as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. So another question came in. Why is it that menopause is considered a dysfunction of the female reproductive organs during aging? It would actually be abnormal for us not to ever go through menopause. So maybe that's more of a philosophical, cultural question.
Oh my God, that's such a good question. I would say because the women's bodies have, especially in medicine, have traditionally been viewed as only being important for reproduction. And because we're now unable, as we go through menopause, our reproduction is either disrupted or completely halted. It's kind of viewed in this standpoint of, oh, she's no longer useful for reproduction, therefore it's dysfunctional. And yes, as we live longer, we are going through, there's kind of that side of things, but then there's also the side of like, as healthcare gets better, we can live longer and therefore go through these kind of age-related changes like menopause. There's also some philosophy and conversation about like I think it's like the grandmother hypothesis or something about how women can stop giving birth, but then they're able to then help for care of the next generation. And so it's like less competition and things like that. So it's a very philosophical question and answer kind of thing here, but It's a fantastic question.
Yeah. Good. So I'm actually going to hold off on a couple of questions that came through because I think you might be addressing them in our next kind of section. But just to wrap up, I'm going to combine 3 questions that came in regarding what plays a factor in menopause. So there was a question, what if you've never been pregnant? How does a condition like PCOS affect menopause? And what if you've had an IUD and not have had a period for 15 years? Do any of those things play a factor in the onset of menopause?
Yeah, I wanted to look into how birth control, either oral contraceptives or IUDs, affect menopause, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of research. Um, Unfortunately, research on menopause isn't, you would think it would be great, and there isn't that much. So I couldn't really find anything on if um, uh, oral contraceptives or other forms of birth control influence menopause.
Mm.
I would guess that as long as it isn't significantly impacting your physiology in another way, then it probably isn't going, like birth controls probably aren't going to have that much of an impact, because we're generally just like when you're going, especially IUDs, they're not really affecting your reproductive cycles. They're just thinning out your uterus. So they're, not doing too much to your body other than that.
Mm-hmm.
PCOS, I have seen some research where women who have PCOS are more likely to have kind of extreme symptoms. And they also might go through more early onset menopause as compared to somebody who doesn't have PCOS. And then the other one, what was the first thing? I can't remember.
Never being pregnant.
Oh, yeah, I think women who haven't been pregnant, they tend to experience more extreme symptoms. I don't know why, and that's not always the case, but women who, it seems, and I don't, this research may be biased, but women who have children earlier and who have more kids, it seems that they tend to have kind of more milder menopausal symptoms, from my understanding. So unfortunately, that's another thing that doesn't get studied well enough, especially in the context of women who don't have children. But that's what I know off the top of my head.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. So the other questions and any other questions that come in, we'll reserve those for our final question and answer period. So thank you.
Great. So the next half of our conversation, or kind of less than half, is going to be talking about what is with our control. And I talked about all of these different factors of things that influence menopause, these symptoms that we go through. And it's not, a death sentence per se. It's not, it's not that there's anything wrong with us. It just means that there's only so much that we can do and so much that we can control. So I'm going to focus on just a few things that I have found that the research says it seems that these are okay in improving your quality of life during menopause. Then we'll also have a very brief conversation about how we can support ourselves and other people who might be going through menopause as well. So I want to just reiterate that as we think about improving our quality of life during menopause or during our midlife period, we have to remind ourselves that only so much is within our control. And so I want us to think of kind of two different approaches. First of all is just in general, improving your overall wellness. So this is going to be making choices that improve your quality of life. What improves your quality of life may be very different than what improves your friend's quality of life. And just like how your friend might have some symptoms and you don't, it's important for us to consider what's best for ourselves as opposed to what's best for other people. And then also, you don't have control over your symptoms. That's not something you can really, change. You can't just wake up one day and be like, I don't want to have hot flashes anymore. But you can potentially treat these symptoms either through lifestyle changes or through medical interventions. So those are kind of, one, improve your wellness, but then two, also approach it from a medical standpoint. Those are kind of the two different ways that are potentially in your control. And I will say again, and I'll say it about 500 more times, if something is bothering you, talk to your doctor. No matter if it seems small, no matter if it seems like, oh, all women go through this, so it shouldn't matter. Like if it's bothering you, talk to your doctor. That's very crucial. So I'm going to start off by talking about smoking. And this is not to demonize anybody who smokes, but there is a lot of evidence to support that smoking tobacco is going to significantly impair quality of life for midlife women. And women who smoke are more likely to go into menopause at a younger age. And this, again, means that her estrogens are going to be lower at an earlier age and putting her at risk for a lot of other different health complications earlier in life as opposed to later in life. And women who smoke are more likely to experience frequent and severe symptoms, including hot flashes, sleep disruptions, depression, and even cognitive decline. And this is likely because a lot of the different chemicals that are involved in smoking tobacco, especially smoking cigarettes, those are going to be directly influencing your biology and influencing the brain and the body. And so if you're interested in quitting smoking, the University of Illinois Extension does have resources. By no means, if you smoke, are we blaming you for the symptoms that you experience, but it is something to consider that this is a lifestyle choice that you could potentially change. And so if you need help, there are resources available to you. And this is especially for folks that are within the central Illinois area. And then also some things that we can change as well is what medications we're taking. Now, this obviously is going to generally require a doctor and a conversation with a doctor in order to change, but this is something to consider. If you aren't taking any of these medications, it might be worth talking to your doctor about if you want to improve your quality of life. So antidepressants or anxiety medications, a lot of people know these as generally to reduce depression and anxiety. Some people might even know them as being helpful for treating things like insomnia, but there is also evidence to support that a lot of different antidepressant medications are also helpful for reducing hot flashes. And we don't know why that is. There likely is some connection in the brain that these medications are helping, regulate. But there is pretty substantial evidence for a lot of different types of medications to help with hot flashes. A lot of folks may also be aware of hormone therapies, and there's kind of two different sides to the hormone therapy coin. There's the prescribed hormone therapies, and then there are botanical or over-the-counter hormone therapies. And these are generally going to be either synthetic or natural estrogens and progestins, like progesterone, that are going to mimic those hormones in your body and help reduce some of these symptoms that you may experience, like hot flashes, insomnia, depression, and even improve vaginal health. So there are a lot of different ways that folks can take hormone therapies, and it's important to note, though, that they don't work for everyone. So your friend might be taking a prescribed hormone therapy and you try it and it doesn't help you. That doesn't mean that anything's wrong with you. It just means that either you need to try something else or this is not going to be a therapy that's assistive for you. I also want to talk about botanical therapies, and there's a lot of kind of over-the-counter or natural sources of hormones that may help reduce menopause symptoms. Although a lot of these are over-the-counter or even from dietary sources, you should still talk to your doctor if you plan on taking any type of hormone therapy. And one reason is because there might be a prescribed version of it that is more regulated and therefore going to be more consistent in helping your symptoms. But also there are some folks who should not be taking hormone therapies because of potential underlying medical conditions or other medical histories that might be sensitive to hormone therapies. I also want to bring up that a lot of botanical therapies are not regulated, and the fact that how much is it within one pill in your bottle is going to be very different than the amount of a pill, the amount in another pill in your bottle. And this is not to say that botanical therapies are bad. It's just to say that there is less regulation of them by the FDA because they're considered supplements. And so we need to be a little bit more cautious when consuming botanical therapy. So I think talking to your doctor about any of these, but even if you're taking something over the counter, it's important to talk to your doctor. Then also other medications that have been shown to influence menopause symptoms in a positive way. Melatonin, a lot of folks know about this as an over-the-counter treatment for insomnia. It has been shown in short-term kind of therapy regimens to help improve insomnia in midlife women. There's also something called a GABA-A agonist, which is this is a signal or a chemical signal naturally occurring in your brain. And you can take chemicals that help mimic this signal, and it helps you actually feel more tired. And specifically, there are ones that are non-addictive or non-benzodiazepines. Benzodiazepines tend to be addictive drugs. You can actually find some that are non-addictive, and those can also be treated or used to treat insomnia in midlife women. And then finally, this is one medical intervention that a lot of folks don't think about, but women who are in their midlife are more likely to experience or go through or have sleep apnea. And this just occurs because of changes in breathing patterns and then also changes in body composition. So as women go through midlife, they may want to go to a sleep clinic and get assessed for sleep apnea, especially if you're feeling tired during the day, even though you might have had a normal night or what you think is a normal night of sleep. If you're starting to feel tired all the time, it might be worth talking to your doctor about being assessed for sleep apnea. And this can be easily treated with a CPAP machine. And so it's something that, you know, can be quickly fixed as long as it gets diagnosed early. And kind of moving away from the medical side of things for a second, I want to talk to you about some evidence that supports the idea that exercise can actually improve quality of life in midlife women. So one study that actually took experiments from multiple studies, combined the information and did an assessment on their findings, found that exercise at a low to moderate intensity was able to reduce depression, how women perceived their stress levels, and improve their insomnia. And all women were doing in these different studies was performing either aerobic exercise or yoga. And so aerobic exercise can be things like swimming, cycling, walking, or using the elliptical or other things like that that gets your heart pumping. So what we generally think of as cardio. Women were doing different amounts of these exercises, but in general, it seems about 30 to 60 minutes, about 3 to 5 times a week. I know that's a big range, but it kind of depends on where you're coming from. If you're somebody like me who maybe recently hasn't been exercising as frequently, I think for me, doing exercise maybe 3 days a week for 30 minutes, maybe doing some yoga once a week, and then some swimming other days of the week, that would be increasing my relative amount of exercise at a given time. And that might start to help reduce depression and stress and insomnia for me. Whereas somebody who's already doing exercise for 30 minutes 3 times a week may want to kind of up this a little bit more, either increase their intensity or just add a few extra days. So they found specifically that this helps with depression and stress and insomnia. But another study actually found that exercise was able, or 2 other studies I found, showed that exercise was able to reduce hot flashes, both how often women were having hot flashes and how severe their hot flashes felt. So one study showed that women that went through about 4 months of resistance training, doing about 3 days a week of 8 exercises in 2 sets, nothing super specific, just doing some mild body weight exercises or low weight exercises for 3 days a week, were starting to show reduced frequency and severity of hot flashes. Another study found that 12 weeks, or about 3 months of 30 minutes a day, 3 times a week of moderate intensity aerobic exercise or cardio, were also showing reduced frequency and severity. And I want to reiterate again that a lot of these exercises were based off of where the women already were. So it's not like all women were doing the same regimen. But, you know, if one woman was a little bit less active, just barely increasing her activity levels was enough to help reduce the frequency and severity of these symptoms. So although there isn't a lot of evidence, a lot of this evidence is recent. It's from studies that have come out within the last 5 to 6 years or so. So there are also some other therapies and other types of interventions that might be helpful for reducing symptoms. First of all, cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT as it might be referred to, is a type of therapy that combines both cognitive therapy, or talk therapy that a lot of people know it as, or where you go and sit and talk to your therapist. That combined with either behavioral and educational interventions has been shown to increase, or it's been shown to treat symptoms of menopause. So you go into your doctor and you or your therapist and you talk about your sleep symptoms, and your therapist might prescribe a sleep restriction regimen, or educate you on sleep hygiene. These types of cognitive behavioral therapies have been shown to improve sleep quality in midlife women. It's also been shown the same type of therapy, this insomnia-specific cognitive behavioral therapy, also has been shown to help reduce the stress associated with hot flashes. It might not reduce the number of hot flashes you have, but it still can help with the stress that you're feeling regarding your hot flashes, which is very important. It's not just reducing your hot flashes, but how you feel about them. Also, some studies have shown that health coaching, and this is just really talking to women about improving their lifestyles. So even a conversation like this is considered health coaching. Talking about how to quit smoking, improving your diet, and really just focusing on having a more balanced diet, increasing exercise. Having these types of conversations are able to reduce your general menopause symptoms that you're feeling and improve quality of life. Another study showed something similar, but they only did 12 weeks of health education with just a supervision of diet and exercise. They just looked at journals of their diet and exercise. They found that this reduced depression, fatigue, and pain in midlife women. So there's evidence that even just having conversations and supporting women on health education and just general lifestyle factors is able to improve their symptoms or their experience of symptoms. Some two kind of alternative therapies that I found that were really interesting and supported by several different studies. One is hypnosis. This has actually been shown to focusing on relaxation and focusing on improving sleep. This has actually been shown either using self-hypnosis or through a trained hypnotherapist. It's been shown to improve sleep quality just after about 2 months of treatment. It may also be effective for reducing the discomfort that women experience from hot flashes as well. And I think this gets back to kind of focusing on relaxation and focusing on taking care of yourself. These things have been shown to really help improve quality of life. And then finally, another type of intervention that I've seen that has been supported by several amounts of evidence is acupuncture, which this has been shown to reduce sleep disturbances and insomnia associated with menopause. I think this gets back to kind of that relaxation, mindfulness, meditation that I'll talk about in the next slide. But it's kind of these relaxation techniques that are shown to help with menopause symptoms. And here in this image, it just came from this first paper, and it's just to show these were some of the more common pressure points used in the acupuncture treatments for these studies that they were looking into. And then kind of reiterating on this conversation of mindfulness, meditation, relaxation, one large study found that having women go through relaxation training and mindfulness training that focuses on attention to their body, their breath, their relaxation of muscles, was shown to reduce insomnia, hot flashes, improve quality of life, both psychological and physical or health, and then also improve attention. So women underwent an 8-week trained program where they were asked to perform 24 to 40 minutes of mindfulness and relaxation techniques a day, but they didn't have to do this. And so compliance was, not necessarily 100%. Some women didn't complete 7 days a week of this for 8 weeks. But practices that women were exposed to and learning about included mindful muscle relaxation. So this is working up your body, thinking about your muscles, contracting them and relaxing them and contracting them and relaxing them, focusing on individual muscles in your body. Loving kindness meditation or kind of compassion related meditations, just general mindfulness meditation. So noticing your body, your breath, and your surroundings. And then informal conversations with other participants also occurred when women would come into in-person aspects of the training program. They would just talk about their health, how they're feeling, how they're going through the program, and they would just talk with other participants and start to build this sense of community among each other. And so all of this, again, was shown to kind of improve quality of life by potentially reducing other symptoms. And so I want to take a pause here to talk about how we can support someone going through menopause, either ourselves or somebody else we know. And I know some folks have already started answering this question, but I know Chelsea has a survey going on about this. So it looks like some folks are talking about what they can do to support themselves. And I'm seeing exercise, yoga, more balanced diet. I see somebody saying be there to support them and remind them that the things they're feeling doesn't mean that, yes, that doesn't mean anything is wrong with you. Absolutely. Somebody's talking about how they've talked to their doctor, they take care of themselves, having conversation with other women. I think that's fantastic. I'm seeing a lot of really great ideas here. And Chelsea, are we able to share these with participants so they can see, like, in the future what other people have said?
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, so this is live and we can share out a link so people can see the results. So we can do that.
Fantastic. Exercise partnership is a big one. I know myself, if I have somebody who I know is going to work out with me, I'm more likely to continue exercising. So keep answering here if you have ideas. I'm going to share my screen and show you that I've come up with just a few 6 ideas that might be helpful, especially for supporting somebody else going through menopause. I think one thing we need to change, and similar to women who are going and having their period, making sure you're not blaming somebody's reactions or somebody's emotions or somebody's feelings and just saying, oh, it's because of menopause. That kind of diminishes their experience, and say, yeah, it may be because of menopause, but this is still a concern that I have. And so listening to them and being mindful not to add to her guilt. And I think this is really, really important for partners, especially sexual partners of women going through menopause. As women go through menopause, they're going to be potentially less interested in sex. And that's like a normal part of going through menopause if you experience it. There's nothing wrong with you if it happens. So being mindful to not make somebody feel guilty if those changes are happening, and finding other ways to engage in intimacy or sharing, experiences with your partner. Also, if she does something or says something, especially related to sex or sexual health, like, don't take it personally. It might not be you. Now, if it's you, you need to have those conversations. But a lot of times, like, there might just be lack of interest or discomfort or changes in her perception of her body that are kind of normal, are not necessarily good parts of the aging process, but it's going to happen, and people have to learn how to navigate those together. And I would say also educating yourself too. There's a lot of resources for people going through menopause, but then there's also a lot of resources on how to support folks going through menopause. I think this was a fun one I found, but let her control the thermostat. If she's somebody who has hot flashes, she needs to be able to control the temperature of the house herself. And then and this kind of comes down to being part of her support network. So as a woman going through menopause starts to increase her support network, and the people that are there to take care of her, be a part of that. Be somebody who goes on walks with her, or starts a new diet, or tries a new sleep hygiene routine or something like that. Join her in those efforts and be part of that conversation. All right, so some final thoughts just in relation to these lifestyle changes that we can make. So I think I didn't talk about this too much, but again, what works for you or works for your friend might not work for the other person. So yes, it's important to have conversations with other folks who are going through menopause, but use that as like kind of a guide. It might not work for you, and don't get frustrated with yourself if it doesn't, because there's nothing wrong with you. It just means you have to try something else. Also, make sure you're working with your various healthcare providers to find a treatment plan that best addresses your concerns. I think this is also important. I don't talk about this here, but if you are somebody who's religious, making sure you're including, your religious community or your religion's community in that healthcare provider list. I list doctor, therapist, psychiatrist, but there's other folks who are non-traditional who might be important for you as well. And then also keep track of your progress. And this is going to be part of the action items, but keep a journal. Start thinking about, what am I going through? What bothers me? What doesn't bother me? What do I want to change? What can I change? What's not in my control? What is within my control? And then remember, it's all connected. So no matter how big or how small something feels, it's probably related. And if it's not, it's okay. You can still think about it and address it. And if it's not, doesn't end up being related to your menopause, move on and just, focus on other things. But a lot of these aspects, your symptoms, how you feel about menopause, your lifestyle, your physical and mental health, your community support, all of these things are tied to one another, and addressing them at all sorts of different standpoints is going to help improve your quality of life. So some final conclusions, I'm going to kind of breeze through these so we have time for questions. So key takeaways, and if you have access to the handout, which you should if you're a registered participant, these are also highlighted in the handout as well. So again, a reminder that menopause is caused by changes in the brain, pituitary, and ovaries, either throughout the process of aging or in response to other medical conditions or surgeries. Many factors, both within and not within our control, are known to influence menopause symptoms. And so there are changes that you can make in your life that can improve your quality of life. And I think focusing on those things is going to really start to help reframe that mindset of how we approach menopause. And so what are some things that you can do today? I think if you're somebody going through menopause or concerned about menopause and you're here today, you're already starting this journey if you have not already started it. And so I think that that's important, is, finding ways to support yourself and to educate yourself about your experience. So first, one thing that you can do also is start taking note of your concerns, your symptoms. What are you currently doing to address these concerns or symptoms? Taking note of those things. Start a journal. Start kind of this evidence for you and your experience of menopause. And then you can make appointments with your healthcare providers to address some of these concerns. And they might help give you other ideas that I didn't even address here that could help you start to improve your quality of life and your wellness. I think this is important too, especially for women and caregivers, is taking time for you. That's really critical, as a lot of these things are going to require time, especially things like exercise and trying a new diet, building community. So try some new activities and routines and find out what works best for your mental and physical wellness. What works for you may not necessarily work for your friend, and what works for them might not necessarily work for you. So try some things out. If it doesn't help, stop and move on to something else. There's no shame in just continuing to try new things. And then finally, finding your support network, whether it's online, in your community, your partner, your friends, other people in the local community. Find the people that are going to help you with your journey. And I found some online communities for you that I'm going to plug here. Some of these are free. I believe this National Menopause Foundation is free. I'm almost certain that these are too, but there are free resources for building community online, and these should all be made available to you. Then there's also other resources for learning about menopause these websites in general are very helpful for learning about hormones in general, but they also have information about menopause. And then these are specifically related to menopause. If you're a podcast listener, the Positive Pause and the Happy Menopause are two podcasts addressing menopause themselves. And a shameless plug for me, if you're interested in learning kind of the more sciencey side of hormones, my podcast, Endocrine Disruptors, is available for free for anyone to listen. And then there are some additional reading for specific topics like menstrual cycle basics, menopause basics, books that you may want to purchase related to menopause specific topics related to sleep. There's this awesome resource for the Illinois Extension. If you're interested in getting involved in mindfulness but don't know where to start, there's this mindfulness for stress reduction that's available. And then I didn't talk about this because this is not my strong suit, but there are some evidence, there's some resources for learning about things like soy and other botanical estrogens that might be interesting for folks who are aware of those topics. Then a plug for next week's conversation, Training Your Immune System, Outlining the Effects of Exercise on Immune Function by Noah Hutchinson, who's a graduate student at U of I. It's occurring at the same time. You can register here at this link. And then finally, I want to thank everybody for their support and for being here and listening. I know this has been a long conversation, but I am very excited to answer any questions that you may have. And then, like I put at the top of the slides, if you want to reach out to me on social media or shoot me an email, I'm happy to try to address like more general questions. I can't give medical advice, but I can at least start to have a conversation with you about some science or some evidence and things like that. So thanks.
All right, so we did have some questions that came in, and I do realize we're a little over, so if you have to leave and get somewhere else, by all means, feel free to go ahead and check out, but if you want to stay on and have some of your questions answered, please feel free to stay on. So just one that came in the first half was, are the use of estrogens substitutes for bad health?
Are they bad for health?
Are they a substitute for bad health? So I'm assuming the question is, if you've, had not great health throughout your life, is taking estrogen a substitute?
Yeah, I would say that it's not going to be a cure-all. Taking estrogens isn't going to all of a sudden make your health be amazing. Now, if a lot of your health concerns are attributed to lower levels of estrogen, it is absolutely possible that they could help a little bit. But I think it's only part of the puzzle that is going to help improve, overall health in general.
Okay, great. So there was also some discussion in the chat box about if vitamin C and zinc help with nighttime hot flashes. Any thoughts on that?
I'm not familiar, but I think I came across some information about supplements. I can write that down and look into specifically vitamin C and zinc and see what I can find, and then maybe we could send that out to registrants. If
Perfect.
That's a possibility.
And while you're writing that down, I'll just address Anna. We will provide all the resources. We can do that through the site where we host the webinar recording. So earlier, Katherine mentioned a resource from Extension about stopping smoking, also the potential signs. We will include that information. So just a couple of, you talked about smoking having a major impact on menopause and symptoms. The question that came in was, what if you don't smoke, but your parents smoked while you were living with them? Any evidence that that might have an impact?
Yeah, now secondary or even tertiary or third-hand smoking hasn't really been studied very well in context of menopause. But in general, when we look at the effects of smoking in menopause and things like, or smoking in general, there appears to be like secondhand smoking is going to affect people not as bad, but likely in a similar way, or at least in kind of a diluted way. So I would guess that secondhand smoking, depending on how much somebody was exposed, it could potentially contribute to either on age of onset of menopause or symptoms that people experience. I think the important thing is whenever you can stop your exposure, stop it, no matter where you are in life. There's only so much control over especially secondhand smoke. So, there's not a lot that we can do to counteract it, but we can at least stop our exposure as early as possible.
Good, awesome. So a question also came in about a couple of symptoms or symptom related questions. So is the overproduction of oily skin a symptom? Can it be a symptom?
I've seen dryness being, skin dryness being a symptom. I wouldn't be surprised that just general skin changes can also be associated with menopause as well. Because especially like on our face, we know that hormones can affect our skin in general. I have seen some things about menopausal acne, which could be contributed to excessive oil production and things like that. I haven't seen a lot about oily skin, but I would not be surprised if that were also considered a symptom. Just might not be as common.
Right. Also symptom related. The question was, are there symptoms that signal that perimenopause is almost at an end?
Great question.
Yeah, and that might be individualized too, I would.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that my only guess is maybe for some folks they might their cycle lengths might be getting longer and longer, but some folks will cycle all the way up until they go into menopause. So it's really hard to tell. I think the most common way, if this is something of concern, if you're like, I want to know where I'm at, that's where like getting a blood draw and getting your hormones checked is like one of the more common ways to figure out where you are, because there's kind of relative amounts of hormones that we can put women into categories based off of those things. The way that we classify women's stages is based off of like cycles and then hormones in general, and not as much on symptoms.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So the final question, Katherine, is concerning suicide. And the question came in, isn't there an increased suicide rate of women going through menopause? So I'm not sure if you found anything in the research about that.
I haven't seen anything specifically talking about suicide, but there is a significant increase in depression and anxiety and stress. And those not always are, you know, they're not necessarily causes of people to, you know, die by suicide, but they are generally related. And so I would not be surprised to see if that is like a correlation. And then there's also just a lot of, you know, kind of miseducation and misrepresentation of what menopause is. A lot of people think, or a lot of the conversation tends to be around, oh, menopause is bad or there's something wrong with you, but it's not. There's something wrong with you when you're going through menopause. And so I think that could potentially contribute to people's mindsets as they start to go through that period of their life.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the question and answer. If there's any others that come in, we can try to address in a follow-up email, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I know I'm going to turn it over to Corinne with a quick word about a survey.
Yeah, so can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, yep, you're good.
So I just wanted to quickly highlight, Chelsea put a Qualtrics survey into the chat a few messages ago. We would really love if you guys fill that out. It's going to look very similar to the previous weeks, but we are looking at planning ahead for the future, both in terms of new seminars to bring to you guys, but then also a way to address a lot of the questions that we've been getting that we aren't able to talk about in the seminars that are currently going on. So we'd love to hear from you guys and see what kind of medium is going to be best for us to communicate that information. So please fill out the survey. Chelsea just put it in the chat again. And we'd love to get some input on how you guys want to receive information moving forward that we weren't able to address, and then also what kind of seminars you want to see in the future.
Great. So again, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today, for participating. And again, we hope to see you next week for our topic on training your immune system, outlining the effects of exercise on immune function. So again, thank you everyone for joining us, and we will see you next week.